The time has come to admit a simple, brutal truth. Change is born from discomfort, and those who seek transformation in an era of corporate capture and creeping authoritarianism must make peace with unease. In an age like ours, where democracy is not merely threatened from without but hollowed from within, demands a new courage, a courage not just of protests and posts, but of the pocket. The very habits that define modern life, the seamless stream of spending and consumption, are now the currency of complicity. Real reform, whether against a government corrupted by money or a market predating on human necessity, demands pressure more potent than slogans. It demands economic consequence, shaped deliberately by millions who choose to withhold rather than enable. If corporations and political architects now twine together in profiteering, feel nothing from our outrage but sound and fury, they will go on, undisturbed and undefeated, to bankroll policies that erode citizenship, bleed labor, and turn the public good into a playground for the rich. Lip service resolutions and viral hashtags, votes cast in systems rigged by gerrymandering and collusive courts, these have become the tranquilizers of democracy, the opiates of change. What is needed now is sacrifice, not for the romance of suffering, but for the unambiguous leverage that only economic discipline provides. What industry, and the regime aligned with it, fears most is not our anger, but our abstention. When Americans realize that nearly every act of spending, every unconscious turn at the register, is a micro-vote for the very system that mockingly exploits them, the myth of powerlessness shatters. It is not a coincidence that the Trump-aligned corporate class, funding reaction, denial, and division, thrives on a population sedated by comfort. Oil barons funnel profits into campaigns that deny climate reality and propagate nationalist myth. Data conglomerates harvest human attention and emotion, selling rage engagement as advertising gold while weaponizing division. Luxury brands build dark money networks that quietly shore up the politics of oppression. In this world, every dollar is counted not by its consumer utility, but by its ability to extend the life of a system. Designed to keep wallets open and consciences quiet, this is how authoritarianism sustains itself in the marketplace, by converting economic habits into votes for continuity. The story we are taught with relentless repetition is the story of helplessness. Democracy becomes a spectator sport, its citizens casting their ballots grumbling about inflation and riding the slow wave of decline. But history tells a different story. When enough ordinary people turn cold to the register, when mass purchasing behavior is redirected, both industry and government feel the tectonic rumble. This is an abstraction or wishful reminiscence. It is memory, hard-earned, clear, and urgent. Recall the civil rights boycotts of the 1960s, the Montgomery bus boycott, a profound act of collective, sustained economic refusal. For over a year, people risked livelihoods, safety, and comfort to starve the revenue streams that propped up Jim Crow. Moral clarity and disciplined abstention forced politicians and corporations alike to reckon with change long before the law dared intervene. Their statement was not passive. It was embodied in daily inconvenience, the pain of isolation, the hard discipline of doing without. This kind of discomfort, voluntary, strategic, communal, shook the financial pillars of racism until the laws finally caught up. In the 1980s, anti-apartheid activists in America and abroad forced global brands to reconsider the moral and financial risk of business with a racist regime. Shares dropped. Executives panicked. The boycott became an unmistakable language, profit versus principle. Even insulated multinational corporations could not ignore the disruptions, the public relations disasters. This wasn't the work of elites. It was the collective will of people who accepted economic discomfort for the higher cause of justice. Each movement, whether for civil rights or against apartheid, relied not on slogans, but on patient, disciplined sacrifice by everyday people who said, "I will do without." They bore temporary isolation, inconvenience, the real costs of being first movers. They taught again, injustice carries a price when conscience is mobilized over comfort. Today, the fight against the Trump regime's corrupt web of state and private power requires the same discipline. The regime survives, even flourishes, on consumer complicity. It banks on citizens so pacified by ease that even the most violent attacks on democracy, the undermining of elections, assaults on climate science, persecution of migrants, barely slow the consumption machine. Each comfort indulged, each unchecked purchase, is a small act of surrender to a design that rewards passivity. What those in power cannot survive, what they fear most, is quiet, widespread abstention. When Americans turn to local co-ops instead of retail giants, when public transit becomes a conscious choice over gas-driven exuberance, when slower, simpler models of ownership edge out disposable excess, these are not acts of denial but strikes, political strikes. These choices build leverage, shifting the calculus of profit and power, forcing the hand of government and industry alike. Economic sacrifice is not punishment. It is restoration, a kind of moral reawakening that teaches solidarity, stamina, and sober resistance in a culture built to scatter us into atomized, distracted consumers. If Americans allow the Trump regime and its industrial benefactors to condition them to accept inflation, poison, and decay without protest, they rely on our submission. Every act of sacrifice breaks that cycle. Every withheld dollar, every comfort delayed is a confrontation. There is dignity in refusal, and the act of saying no more enriching corporations, laundering propaganda through entertainment, no more supporting entities siphoning public dollars into private profit, no more democracy dying at the checkout counter. As the republic trembles beneath corruption dressed as patriotism, Americans must remember the greatest economic weapon is not speculation or investment. It is the power to refuse. Sacrifice has always been the price of renewal throughout American history. Reform does not come as a package deal, but as an outcome of cumulative, deliberate acts of withdrawal. Democracy cannot survive as a cheap luxury, available only to those comfortable enough to ignore its decay. The Trump regime can be resisted in courts, streets, and organizing halls, but it can also be starved, deliberately, $1 denied at a time. No movement for lasting change has succeeded without sacrifice. Think back again to the civil rights era and those who walked in place of buses that denied their dignity. Remember workers in Britain demanding divestment from South Africa, fully aware sacrifice demanded more than symbolism. It was a direct blow against an immoral regime. Even now, at a time when American power feels at the mercy of money and deals, resistance lives in choices made quietly, relentlessly by ordinary citizens. Sacrifice is not unique. To protest it is the language of seriousness. It tells power, we refuse to bankroll our own oppression. Imagine the impact if for just a month, millions redirected their spending from extractive corporate machines to locally owned co-ops, sustainable businesses, and organizations aligned with equity and democracy. The contraction of profit margins for fossil fuel giants, data conglomerates, and politically entangled luxury brands would speak louder than a million angry tweets. The anthem of boycott becomes impossible to ignore when it echoes in quarterly reports, share prices, lobbyist panics. This isn't theory, it is precedent. Consumer boycotts as protest, as recent as this year's national economic blackout, have sent ripples through industries, prompting reevaluation of their stance on social and political issues. These acts of abstention are more than ritual. They shock a system pretending immunity to the public's anger and frustration. The comfort barrier breaks only when Americans trade convenience for the higher purpose of reclaiming democracy. Temporary inconvenience harnessed as a strategic power, not masochism, but morality in action. The lesson comes plain. Scarcity breeds clarity. When people become disciplined in refusal, when they say we buy less, we buy better, we stop funding our destroyers, the system faces demands it never intended to answer. Profit machines run on assumptions that people are creatures of comfort, incapable of abstention. But as history repeats and new uprisings emerge, that assumption weakens. Sacrifice starts not in suffering, but in awareness. Enough awareness to know every dollar counts for against a future where democracy is not a luxury, but a non-negotiable requirement. The regime's power is neither moral nor democratic. It is financial and psychological. Its survival depends on millions believing consumption is private and apolitical. In truth, each dollar is a thread in the web sustaining actors hostile to labor, equity, and even the planet itself. So long as the moral circuit breaks at the checkout line, accountability remains a dream. Votes are corrupted, courts cowed, narratives twisted. But abstention from spending is immune to gerrymanders and collusion. Where electoral consequence fades, economic sacrifice endures. The call isn't for retreat, but for advance. A discipline where citizenship means redirecting consumption until both government and industry confront complicity in the open. This is no fantasy, but a demand earned by history. Every boycott, every sacrifice, every act of discomfort is a lesson in courage. America's future depends on relearning it. Powerlessness is a story sold by the profiteers of submission and silence. The real story is written by those willing to endure discomfort for the greater good. Democracy, if it is to survive, demands hard choices. The pivotal choice isn't holding the ballot. It is where conscience meets consumption. No more business as usual, no more fuel for the machine, no more permission granted by default to the architects of decay. If democracy can be built, it can be rebuilt. If justice can be won, it can be won again, but only by those willing to pay the price of renewal, of doing without, of real economic sacrifice. The Trump regime stands on financial insulation, built by a populist condition to keep buying, keep moving, keep accepting. Let that foundation tremble. Let sacrifice be the message, the disruption they did not expect, with every dollar withheld, every comfort delayed, every act of refusal, the walls of complicity weaken. Change is not a gift. It is carved out by those who endure discomfort for something greater. America's time has come to remember and to act. The only real luxury democracy can afford is courage. And courage in this moment means sacrifice. Thank you for listening, for refusing complacency, for making the commitment in action, word, and economic discipline to reclaim the future. This is how change begins. This is how it endures. Thank you for listening to America's Fractured Politics. Until next time, I'm your host, Mark Mansour.